Hello, welcome back. Hope you had a wonderful Christmas. It's the day after Christmas, and today I spent a few hours digging around for the small stuff, the fun stuff, but the small stuff. When you're completing an engine, it's all about the details. There's always lots of choices. But digging around today reminds me of when I was a teenager with my first car and very limited budget. Fortunate that I lived in a city and there was, every auto parts store, every department store had a section of chrome stuff, air cleaners, valve covers, minor stuff, plug wires like we talked about in the other video. And that is about, after saving up all any young aspiring hot rodder could afford, but it allowed you to customize the look of your engine. And that's important when you spend, every night staring at it, which is pretty much describes my youth. So today, I'd already chosen the valve covers, which are probably the most influential piece as far as the look goes, other than the intake manifold. But I chose these. Actually, I bought them, online. They're actually cheap eBay valve covers. They're still $100. I wish I could go back when I was a teenager and they were probably $20, but they're ribbed and they're more fitting for a hot rod, I suppose, and racing inspired valve cover or modern day fabricated valve cover, but that's what we're going to run. On the valve cover you need, and on the engine you need some kind of positive crankcase evacuation, PCV. Some look at it as an emission device. In a way, I suppose so. It got rid of the road draft tube. They used to just come off the back of the engine down by the bell housing and just spew everything on the ground. More offensive to that, it was actually dribbling oil. The actual oil vapor, at least back then, maybe they didn't worry about it so much. But in a hot rod application, you have choices. I see most all your circle track stuff and a lot of, street cars. When you go to the car show, I'm always looking at all these systems. Typically that's a breather right there. You'll see maybe a breather on both valve covers. Stock cars, they put them both over on the driver's side because they're turning left. This valve cover is probably full of oil and the breathers would dump out on the exhaust, probably catch fire. So they put them on that side. And that's all they do. And I suppose in a stock car, you're going to run, to the point where the engine's good and warm, which is going to get rid of the moisture that's going to exist in your engine. Every time you start with the engine cold, it warms up from the inside out, much like if you're heavy breathing on your windshield and it fogs from the inside. Well, your engine is fogging on the inside as well, making that white milky moisture because oil and water don't mix. And if you were to pull your valve cover off when your engine's half warmed up without some type of crankcase evacuation system, you're going to look at white milky stuff, and it's gross. It rusts like rocker arms and stuff and contaminates the oil. There's no reason not to get rid of it. Much more efficient than a couple breathers. Also, if you have just two breathers, they're doing just that. All they're doing is exhaling all over your valve cover, all over your engine, firewall. You're breathing it as you're driving it. If you have any holes in the firewall, it's just gross. One of the latest rages, I see it done on LS engines a lot. They'll run a hose from each valve cover to a catch can, and that has a breather. You really haven't changed anything other than the goop may work its way up the hose if you have enough pressure in your engine, which all engines that run have some leakage past the rings, and this pressure, crankcase pressure, needs to go somewhere. If you didn't have any vent on the engine, you're going to blow the gaskets right out of it. It's going to blow the valve. It's going to pop somewhere because it's going to build up pressure like a balloon, and it's got to go somewhere. So you have to do something with it. I see that Motion Raceworks, I haven't even watched their video about it, but they've taken their catch cans, because they make catch cans, really nice ones, and they pretty much put a PCV valve in it or something that's going to now take that goop and pressure. The goop's going to stay in the catch can, but oil vapors and the pressure is now going to go right back into the engine, much like a PCV valve, which this is my PCV valve right here. It's going to be hooked to vacuum under the carburetor or on the manifold. And the majority of the time you're driving, let's talk about how the PCV system works. Your breather is breathing in. You're sucking here. You got vacuum in the engine. It opens the PCV valve and it's pulling out of this valve cover throughout the whole engine, and this is fresh air in on the breather. On a factory setup, instead of having a breather, it's hooked to the inside of the air cleaner. So filtered air is entering the engine, getting removed with the oil vapor, and getting sucked through the engine and burnt. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't hurt a thing. It's a win-win. It's not anything to be wary against. It's not costing you any horsepower. And majority of your driving, it's just saving parts and making the inside of your engine a happy place. When you're in a situation with no intake manifold vacuum, like full throttle, it stops working, and now your breather goes back to breathing, and it's going to exhale. It's not on a healthy engine like my Street 55 just has a breather and driver's side front of the valve cover, PCV valve just like this. I don't even have anything to clean up on the valve cover after 2 years of driving it like that. So a healthy engine, you're not going to get a whole lot out of there. I don't spend a lot of time at full throttle, so occasionally, but not enough to really make a mess. So. But it is a concern, and if it is, you can route that to the air cleaner. Here's another system that works really well. This is obviously an exhaust header. These pan evacuation kits, Moroso probably came out with them originally. Now they're all over the place. They're $30 to $50. What that gets you is a one-way check valve, which is, if you were a child of the 80s, with all the air pumps and air tubes on the exhaust manifolds, that check valve is absolutely an emissions part. But a smart hot rod guy said, hey, we can't have fire in the exhaust coming back up into the valve cover of the engine. Gas vapors, explosions, fire, whatever, that's a bad thing. Let's put a check valve on it. But when the engine's running, and the faster you rev the engine, the more air, the more suction you're creating. You know, exhaust in the collector is causing a nice suction effect. And this setup is working all the time the engine's running. The faster you rev the engine, the better it works. In later years, NHRA says these have to be tethered or captured. They can't just push into a grommet, but for a street guy or a street rod, you know, these breathers are all over the place. Factories use this with a hose going to the air cleaner. Well, same breather we could put in that valve cover we just looked at. Now it just sucks it out the exhaust. And that's all you need. You don't need a PCV valve if you don't want to run one. This will remove moisture from your engine. Everything we just talked about, and just fire it out the exhaust. So, another good option. While I was digging for parts this morning and this afternoon, I was looking to get a PCV valve and a breather on the 377's valve covers, which are also simple fin design, kind of goes with the whole thing. I love a 14-inch air cleaner, which is what this is. But at the same time, I prefer a smaller one most of the time. Horsepower-wise, the smaller the air cleaner, probably the more restrictive, but in this case, I guess if I'm going single 4-barrel, this isn't a bad setup. This particular air cleaner I bought from a restoration place, a ground up restoration. It's made for a SS 396 Chevelle or whatever application, but from the factory, they absolutely use the fresh air out of the valve cover. If this was a big block with the low chrome valve covers, I bought all this because I have an early 396. I bought a nondescript dual plane Holley flange manifold, the stock valve covers, the stock air cleaner. I wanted to make a stock looking 396, which, you know, it's another project floating around here, but today I went ahead and grabbed this. And remember I talked about a carb spacer. Well, it's gonna work out here. I won't be able to use a cool original GM hose. I can aim this any way I want. That just sticks in the valve cover. But with a spacer under the carb, I'm gonna be able to make that work. It's gonna jack my air cleaner up, everything up a little bit. That's a pretty cool deal, and I think this is going in the 56 wagon, and now I'll be sucking fresh air out of my air cleaner. PCV valve over here, looped to the carburetor. Couldn't be any simpler. So I had to look, when I was looking around, first I needed grommets. In this engine, and my big block we just looked at, the 496, I don't have room for a a baffle. Thank you. I don't have room for a baffle because of the stud girdle. The big block stud girdle it's wider, probably does a better job, but I have not had an issue because this stud girdle is actually baffling my PCV valve. So I'm hoping this engine won't have a problem. I've never had trouble in the past running a stud girdle while sucking out of the valve cover, but that is what the baffle is for. So I'm aware I'll have to keep an eye on it. If I have oil in my air cleaner or whatever, I'll have to do something about it. But I had to find the grommets. Most all aftermarket valve covers have an 1.25 inch hole. So you need a grommet, and I believe the PCV valve takes a 3/4, and most breathers, or this particular breather over here, that elbow, takes a 1 inch hole in your grommet. And the grommets themselves, you know, they're $5 to $10 minimum. If you shop around, you can buy a kit. It has 2 grommets, a PCV valve, and a valve cover breather, just an open breather, you know, for $16 to $17 on eBay or whatever. So you don't have to spend a fortune. You need some hose to connect it, and you'll be happier in the long run than just having a couple breathers. Again, I'm not a huge fan of taking up this much space for an air cleaner, but in the end, you're better off. Somewhere around here, I have like a NASCAR aluminum top. It has a much more pleasing curve, and it's more, I like unpolished aluminum. I like raw aluminum, but mixed in with some polish, it's okay. So I think it would be a nice fit. All I have to do is find it. So I'm on the hunt. I should mention the breathers come in either 3/4 or 1 inch nipple. I unfortunately took this one out of the package today. It was a Transdapt, I think. I'm not going to use it. Now I got to find a way to protect it so it doesn't get all beat up and full of junk. One thing you'll probably never see me do, you just saw velocity stacks on the 496. I got them in the deal with the engine, but they have air filters on top. But this, as cool as it is, what's going to happen if rain or nature finds a way to put water in your engine? Not good. Well, it's a great look, and if it's somehow you can protect it all the time, again, it's cool, but you won't probably find me with velocity stacks, or even, I recently picked up 4 or 5 extra flow, whatever they're called, air cleaners. They got like a K&N air filter element here. I like just a regular paper element for looks, but they also have an element on the top of the air cleaner to breathe air. Once again, that's wonderful and all, but if it rains, you know, same outcome. And I'm not willing to gamble that, so that's just me, I guess. I'm not much of a gambler. I also found valve cover studs, these Moroso valve cover gaskets that have a lot of miles on them. Never been installed on an engine, but they rode in my race car trailer for a few years. As spares, never been used. I actually knew where they were, and I also had a black set. I went with these. Whatever, that's what I'm gonna have. But anyway, having this time today because my push rods didn't show up. They're supposed to be here tomorrow, so tomorrow's Friday. I'm hoping by maybe the end of the weekend I will have push rods in, rocker arm, stud girdle, oil primed. Then I can put the manifold on, valve covers, everything on for real. If you're really paying attention, yes, the front of the motor still needs some touch up paint-wise. The timing cover bolts are raw steel and they're rusted, so I'm gonna carefully touch all that up. Can't help myself. The balancer needs to be painted, so I'll have to take the pulleys off to do all that. But cosmetically, we need a little bit of work. And I set these Proform 750s that I collected, got a good deal on both of them, of course, over the course of a couple of years, buying them one at a time. And they seem to be a nice carb. At least they have, you know, non-stick gaskets and stuff. By turning them sideways, it's easy to service the bowls. I have, another thing I have to go look for, I have several carbureted fuel regulators, and I need to mount that probably over here somewhere so I can route the fuel line this way. While we're talking about fuel line, it's not prohibited by law or anything else, but by the NHRA rule book, you cannot have fuel lines in the bell housings. So running them up like the factory does over the bell housing, EFI wise, to the back of the engine, you still see people doing that a lot on a hot rod and stuff. I mean, I have my transmission or my clutch or whatever I have a shield over it, so having fuel lines in the bell housing kind of redundant, but that's their rule. You got to play by the rules, so you might as well just plumb it this way. They don't mind you running it over the hot exhaust header, but just don't put it in the bell housing. But again, I'm on the fence whether I'm going to go ahead and run carburetors on the 47 Ford truck. That would be the simplest. Modern day, I can buy an EFI fuel pump that'll also do down to carburetor pressure, you know, 5 to 7 pounds. And by just changing the regulator on the engine, the pump stays the same. That's pretty awesome. So I like how some things are crossing over, and whether it'll be EFI, if someday it's going to be EFI, I'll also probably do it sooner than later. And the throttle bodies that my buddy has are all polished like this, so the purple will be gone. The purple doesn't really fit. I don't mind the look of it, but it's kind of out of place. Whatever. So again, we're getting lost in the fact we're just bolting up a bunch of junk. So have a great evening. Talk to you soon. Thanks.